All right, how's everyone doing? My name is Austin and this is Into Boat Stuff YouTube channel. Today we're going to learn about how to install a transducer, specifically an Airmar B164 1 kilowatt transducer. This process will work for pretty much any transducer that is a through-hole mount, such as this one. Smaller transducers are going to use different hole saws, but generally speaking, it's all the same process. So laid on the table, we've got everything we need. Comes with the transducer, you have a rubber gasket, which is typically meant for a metal hole installation. I throw these right out. If you like to use it, go ahead and use it. And also there's a spacer block to take up any width or depth of hole that you do not have. Some boats are cored and they're 1.5 inches thick, 2 inches thick. Some boats are not cored and they're only 3/4 of an inch thick. My preference is to use a block of PVC board, roughly the same diameter as the nut, and not only does it make it look nice and pretty, it also will squish down some to form to the inside of your boat. Not every boat has a perfectly flat and true bilge. Next here on the table, we've got our wrenches. These ones come from Airmar. I think they're like 50 bucks a piece. Whether you're installing it DIY or you're doing it professionally, I think you should have these. If you don't want to spend the money and you've got the tools, you can make them out of aluminum. I've got a handful of these that I've made because I didn't have the time or I didn't want to spend the money. It's a great option. You put some tape or some heat shrink on the end so it doesn't cut your hand, and it works great. Up next, obviously, we're going to be drilling a hole. We've got a hole saw. This one specifically is 3 3/4. All transducers have different hole sizes. Read the instructions, figure that part out. Have a drill that can drill a hole that large. Typically, you'd want to use a corded drill, but use whatever you have. You don't have to go out and buy something new just because you're installing one transducer. After you've drilled the hole, if you don't drill it exactly straight, sometimes the transducer doesn't want to go in. So you have a couple different options. You can use a whiz wheel like this, which is just a wheel with little bits of sandpaper that you can stick in your drill to enlarge the hole, or you can use a 1/4 inch die grinder with a carbide bit on it. This works a little faster. This works just as well, and actually this is probably the better tool as it'll leave a smoother surface. It doesn't gouge in and bite and possibly go further than you want it to go. After you've drilled the hole, and you enlarge it if you need to, I suggest, depending on your boat, if you have a bottom painted boat, absolutely take a regular sheet of sandpaper, take a little grinder, and remove that bottom paint. It doesn't need to be completely off, but at least scuff it, at least scratch the surface so that you give the sealant you're using, I prefer 5200, a good surface to bond to. And also a lot of times, I'll go ahead and sand the edge of the transducer, I'll sand the nut, and absolutely, I will sand the bottom of this PVC board because nothing will stick to this if you don't scratch up that surface. And this is, if you're using this, this is a piece that goes on the inside of the boat, which I'll show you later. And you want to make sure that's sticking and that's sealed. Next, you're going to have a caulking gun. Again, I use 5200. I prefer fast cure. It's always worked best for me. Use whatever sealant you like, but make sure that it is meant for an underwater installation because that's what transducer is. I also get these little syringes off of Amazon. You take the caulking gun and you fill the syringe up. Much easier to bring inside the boat. Not necessary, but I've always found it to be a great option. When you're trying to get on the backside of a transducer in a tight bilge, this is much easier than this is. But do it how you want. Next thing on the table, a little mini shoring pole. This is a perfect device to hold the transducer up in place while you put the nut on, while you put your backing block on, whatever you need. If you don't have a second set of hands, or if your second set of hands just isn't very useful, just have them pump this up, and that'll hold it in place while you do everything. Also, use plenty of times a bottle jack or a floor jack. My floor jack's not on the table because it'd probably break the table. I also have here a bucket full of paper towels. I just cut them into little squares because it makes it easier, but this is for cleanup. So I've got a little squeegee here that you scrape up the excess, wipe it on the rag. Again, I'll show this stuff later. And then I use T9 to clean up. You can use alcohol, you can use acetone, whatever solvent you like. I just know that if I'm using a WD-40 or T9, a 656, something that's a typical lubricant, I know it cleans up the caulk very well, and I don't have to worry about it damaging anything. If I'm playing around with any sort of solvent, there is the fear that it might contaminate something. It might remove some paint that I didn't intend it to remove. Specifically solvents on bottom paint, it's just going to smear bottom paint everywhere. and that's not something you want. So that about covers everything on the table here. Now let's get to doing it. All right, next we're in the boat trying to figure out where to put the transducer, because it's a pretty important part. So the first objection here is you got a live well pump. If you were to put the transducer behind that, that's going to cause some issues. You're going to get some air bubbles off your through hole, and it's going to cause your transducer not to read properly. So that leads us to using the other side of the boat. Generally speaking, in this bilge, there's not really anything that interferes on the starboard side with putting the transducer in. Now you do want on some boats to be careful that you don't put it too far outboard, as you could possibly affect your engines behind you. And obviously you can only go so far inboard, or else you're going to be in the middle of the boat and it's just not going to mount properly. So in this application, pretty much what I'm going to do is take a rough measurement from the live well here to the back of the boat and find the center of that. And then I'm going to go from the existing transducer over to the stringer wall. Going to measure that, take the half of that, and kind of just center it right in the middle of the bilge and right in the middle of this side of the boat. And that'll be generally where I'll put it. So the first step is to find that, and then after that we're going to go ahead and drill our pilot hole from the inside facing down, and then to drill the hole through the actual boat, we're going to go underneath and drill from the bottom up. Also too, it's like from the glasswork to put this in, this is, I actually kind of want to put it up here. Further forward, this is more flat than it is back here. So further forward's a little bit better anyways. I just want to make sure I can be able to tighten that nut, and I think in this application I got plenty of room. And maybe I need to shorten this live well hose a little bit to get it further out of the way, but it'll probably be alright. So we loaded up the hole saw into the drill. I've got my backing block, or you can use the one that comes with the transducer. I use this as a general idea of where the transducer can and cannot go. If I just use the hole saw to drill the hole and I don't measure right, I can drill too far over and the stringer might get in the way, and we don't want that to happen. So I've got a general idea of where I want to put the transducer. I'm going to set that block in there, and this also helps me find a spot that's nice and level, which right there, I like that right there. So I'm going to take this, which you probably can't see much, but I'm going to use it as a guide to where I can put the transducer at, where I can drill the hole. So like I said before, I'm just going to mark it right now. So that's marked. I can see my hole there. I'm going to do my best to drill this straight. Here we go. And, you know, smarter people might use a vacuum while they're doing this, but not me. And we'll also go to speed 1. Are we there yet? Ow, fuck. There she is. Hello. All right, so now we've shoved the transducer up through the boat, and got the shoring pole on the ground. Jesus, come on, focus. Got the shoring pole on the ground holding this in place, so it's not going anywhere. Typically, like I said, I like to use a PVC block. I think it looks prettier. Just personal preference. By no means do you need this, but it's how I was taught to do it, along with traditional through holes as well. But that's not going to work. There's too much gap between the threads and the boat to use that, but still, we want to dry fit things. So this is the backing block that comes with the transducer itself. Slide that on, slide the nut on, and if anyone has noticed here that this cable is extremely short, it is. Typically there's like a 30-foot cable. This is a used transducer that came out of a different boat, and we're putting it in this boat now. So simply all we're going to do is tighten this nut down. It doesn't need to be, you know, completely and totally tight like a full installation, but what we're looking for, and I'm feeling around, is there any gaps Is there a 1/4 inch gap on one side? Is it sitting lopsided? Can I tighten it down all the way? Sometimes I'll use a wrench. If there's a little bit of a gap, I might use a wrench and kind of wrench it down to see if there's any issue with it, or if I can take up that slack by tightening it. But this one's fitting really well, so I'm going to leave it alone. So what I'm also going to do, there's a pencil, I'm going to mark the outside edge of this, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom of the boat. And what that's for is that's where I'm going to sand. Now again, if you've got a boat that has a finished bilge, everything's really pretty. Obviously this is whitewater. It's just got a gel coat painted bilge. It's very simple. It's not a glossy finish. It's not perfectly flat. Unlike a contender, a CV, a regulator, things of that nature. Plenty of other boats have finished bilges. You want to be more careful with that. Maybe you'd want to tape it off, or you don't have to prep the surface, but I really suggest that you do. So for this application, I'm going to circle around the underneath of the transducer, and on the inside, I'm probably just going to do this by hand. On the outside, I might use a power tool, but just scuff it up with some 80 grit, 40 grit, something like that, something rough, just to give your adhesive something more to bite to. And while we're here, I'll show you too on this backing block. Again, this is a used transducer, so it's going to be a little different. This backing block, there's some air voids. And I don't recall what the literature says, but I'll tell you what I say. Oh, get this nut off of here. Come on, go. Get this backing block off. Get this damn live well hose out of the way. All right, so what I wanted to point out is this one, you can see is already filled up with some type of caulk. I'm going to come through and try to pick most of this out because this is silicone, and other things like to stick to silicone. But when I use these, I fill these all. They use a bunch more sealant, but I fill these all the way up with 5200. And also too, I'm not sure why this is cut out. Ignore that. Must have been a fitment issue in the last installation. Typically it's a full circle. But I'm going to remove all this, and then when I go to install it, I'm actually going to physically fill all these holes with 5200, as well as putting a bead around the transducer itself, which I'll show all this, but I'm just pointing out to preface it. So I'll fill all those up, put a bead around the transducer, and I'll typically put a little bit on the inside of here as well. You kind of can't go wrong. If you really just goop it up like crazy, typically you could cause a leak because there's too much sealant, and it just doesn't work. I don't know how to explain it other than that. But you're going to have far more issues from not enough sealant than you will have from too much sealant. And the only other issue is cleanup. 5200, I don't know how to explain it, but it's a living creature. And it'll attack you, and it'll get on your hand, and then it's on your feet, and then it's in your hair, and it just gets everywhere. So if you've never worked with 5200 before, wear some gloves. Wear multiple gloves. If you watch any fiberglass work videos on YouTube, guys will show you they'll put on 2 or 3 pairs of gloves at a time, so when they get dirty, they can just rip them off, kind of like, motocross, you have tear-off goggles. So that's a good option. I typically don't wear gloves, I have some experience with this stuff. I do get it on my hands, but I'm typically pretty good at staying clean. But gloves are definitely a great idea. Getting 5200 and acetone, alcohol, and different chemicals in your hands, probably not the greatest idea. The skin in your hands is pretty porous. You want to be careful what you get on it, but that's up to you. So you can see we've outlined where the transducer will land with Sharpie. Obviously, if you have a gel-coated boat and it's shiny and pretty underneath, use a pencil, maybe mask it off with some tape, do something else in the marking with Sharpie, because the Sharpie is likely going to stay there. Bottom painted boat, it's going to get painted back over. You won't ever see it. Not an issue. So let me get this ground down, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So here's the finished product. The gray you can see here is the epoxy primer that's underneath the bottom paint, the white being the gel coat underneath. And again, if this were just a straight gel-coated boat, a painted boat, whatever it may be, you could totally skip this step. It's not needed. You could just hit it with a Scotch-Brite if you wanted to be extra careful, but you'd want to overall do a little bit prettier of a job if it were a boat that didn't have bottom paint on it. But just showing you how I do things, especially if it's a bottom painted boat. You can get away with a little bit more with a bottom painted boat because it's going to get painted back over. But this is what it looks like. This is how it's getting done today. Again, doesn't have to be done, but I like doing it to ensure that I get the best seal possible. Next thing, first off, on any Thru-Hull transducer, there's going to be a little marking that says keel, center of the boat. That needs to be facing towards the keel. It can be off up to, I believe the spec is like 15 degrees or something like that, but it's going to work best if it's pointed as straight as possible. Any of these tilted element, this is a 20 degree, that boat has 24 degrees dead rise. The actual transducer sits in there crooked to adjust because it's going to sit in the boat. It's going to sit in the boat crooked, so you want that transducer pointing straight down. So if it's twisted, that straight down now is going a different direction than it's supposed to. So first things first is you're going to take some blue tape and you're going to cover the whole face of the transducer. You take a razor blade and cut the excess off. And that does two things. That makes cleanup way easier, protects the face of the transducer if you're doing like I do and you take a shoring pole to stick it up. There's a lot of epoxy that protects the actual transducer inside, but you want to do your best not to mar the surface at all. All right, we're back with a fresh tube of 5200 fast cure. Again, use whatever you feel necessary. Just make sure that it's something that is rated for below the water line. You can use 4000 UV, such as this. That stuff works great. I typically don't use it for anything underwater, but it is rated for it. I just like the added security of 5200 because it's a living animal and it seals very well. And not only is it a sealant, it's an adhesive. A lot of people might say not to use the fast cure, which is the red tube, to use a regular blue tube. I've been using fast cure for years. I've never had an issue with it. I've never had anything leak. If something did leak, it was because of something I did, not because of the sealant. And I like the ability to be able to pretty much put things in the water like that. So we're gonna put a bead around here. I'm gonna do a bead also kind of up on the edge as well. A nice big fat bead, but you wanna have squeeze out. If you're installing a transducer and nothing squeezes out when you push it in my opinion, you didn't use enough sealant. Now you don't need to put, a mountain of sealant on here that's just gonna squeeze out and make a giant mess. So it's something you're gonna have to play with, but you can try your best to replicate what I'm doing here and hopefully that'll help you. And then also let them take the time right now to fill up my syringe to use on the inside of the boat, as well as my backing plate. I'm gonna go ahead and fill all these plugs up and hopefully not make a mess as we bring it into the boat and put it down on top of the transducer. So let's get a gander at this. So that's the bead there, and then I'm just going to do one quick one around the base here, just to help it a little bit. Probably not necessary, but it's something I've always done. And this one is fill it up, fill it up, fill it up. I think you get the point. I'm trying to fill all these voids. Again, I can't say that this is necessary, but 5200, while it might be expensive, it's even more expensive when you have to buy it twice. And I also can't say how easy or difficult it would be. Actually, I can say it'll be extremely difficult to remove this transducer if it need to be removed. And typically, when I remove a transducer, I cut it out. I don't waste time trying to be easy and gentle and fragile with it. I take an oscillating tool, I cut the nut, I hammer the transducer out, so I don't want to put it in a second time. And if you do screw up taking it out, this is an expensive transducer. It's going to cost you a lot of money. So do it right, do it once. All right, now here comes the fun part. So we're getting ready to stick the transducer up. Avoid lifting it by the cable is just another note. You can see my arrows there again, which are going to be pointed towards the center of the boat. I'm actually going to stick it in about 45 degrees away from it being lined up on that. So as I push it in, I can give a little twist. And so I make sure that any place that I didn't really put like even amounts of sealant, that helps even it out. And then we're gonna take our little mini shoring pole here, and we're gonna stick that bad boy on here. Sometimes what I'll actually do is I'll just push that on. Don't push it up too hard. If you push too hard, you can actually push out too much sealant, and then there's not actually any there, and that can cause a leaking issue. But sometimes what I'll actually do is I'll put it like this and leave it overnight. Let it cure, and then come back the next day and do the inside of the boat. Especially if it's a boat that's very tight quarters, and I can't get the wrench to hold the transducer and the wrench to hold the nut both in there at the same time. I'll let it cure overnight, let it get hard, and then come and do the inside the second day, and that seems to work a lot better. We're simply gonna take this and scrape up the excess, wipe it on the rag. We're not cleaning this up right now because there's still gonna probably be some more squeeze out when we tighten down that nut, but we just wanna get this excess off so that it doesn't drip down, because 5200 has a tendency to do that, especially if you're using regular Cure 5200. It's a thinner product, and it'll absolutely drip down on you. So you can see we've already got a little bit of squeeze out in there as it is. We're gonna take our little syringe and we're gonna put some more around there, because hey, can't hurt. One thing to keep in mind, I showed you guys filling up this backing block earlier. Do your best not to overfill it, because it's really easy, especially when you have a full length cable. I've only got like 3 feet of cable on this one, but a full cable is usually like 25 or 30 feet. It's very easy to get 5200 all over your cable and then all over you. I mean, sometimes what I honestly do is slide this down the cable, and then I'll fill this up. Do everything you can. Take some time to think about what you're doing, to prevent this wonderful sealant from getting everywhere. Even as far as, I have both of the little syringe, I have this caulking gun, they're hanging down in the bilge. It's much easier for me to clean up my bilge than it is to clean up the foam decking on this boat. So with a full length cable, just be a little bit more realistic about what you're doing. We're gonna set this here, and we're gonna goop this up nice and good like. And again, you can go, you can go balls to the wall and do too much, but you really, really have to love sealing things up to put too much. I mean, I haven't experienced it yet, and I tend to put more than other people I know that do similar things for a living. And this is a perfect example where this syringe comes in handy. I can get in tighter spaces much easier than I can with a caulking gun. In a caulking gun, you have a tendency to, once again, get it in places where you didn't intend to get it. Like I said, I use T9. There's plenty of other products you can use. You can use 656, which is another marine lubricant product. You can use WD-40, and you can use alcohol. And it works great for cleaning this stuff up. I will say, if you're going to use any type of aerosol product, be sure that you spray it on the rag and not what you're trying to clean up, especially when it comes to final cleanup, like cleaning up around the base of something, whether you're installing a through-hull, a transducer, whatever it may be. If you're to take the can and just spray it directly on there, it can get up underneath and stop the sealant from, sealing. All right, so we've got the transducer straightened out. You can see our little keel arrow pointing towards the center of the boat. So next step, put the nut on. Pretty straightforward there. And this is another reason to try to do your best to keep your install clean as you're going along. Like, for example, why I put 5200 on the transducer and then stuck up in the boat, instead of, say, putting 5200 on the bottom side of the boat where it's going to drip off. It's going to get all over the transducer. And you know, sometimes with these transducers, especially the smaller ones that have finer threads, man, if you get sealant on those threads, it's tough to clean it out, and you'll have to use the wrench the entire way down. And you know, it's like this transducer here is fiberglassed in, but if it's not, some of them have a really long stem on them, and it takes forever to get that nut down. And if you've got sealant on there, man, you're gonna be fighting it the entire way. So do your best to keep sealant out of the threads. Just make your own life easier. So we're gonna tighten this bad boy down as much as possible by hand. And then we're gonna come over here to our wrench, which again, you can buy these directly from Airmar. Airmar's, almost any transducer you're gonna install is an Airmar transducer. And these are available straight, you know, online. You might not find them at like West Marine, but if you just Google, you know, whatever B60, B164 transducer wrenches, they come up very quickly. They're pretty affordable. Whether you're doing this for a living or not, I think they're worth the money. Or like I said before, take and trace the nut onto a piece of aluminum. If you have a bandsaw, or even, you know, you can use a jigsaw, and just make it out of aluminum. You know, I have multiple of these. I use them for, you know, all sorts of different stuff, but mainly transducers. They just work great. So we're gonna get to tightening this thing down. That's our last step. We're gonna clean up in here. I guess second last step. We're gonna clean up in here and then do a full clean on the bottom of the boat. Same process as I showed before. I'll wipe up all the excess. And once we wipe up all the excess, we'll take and wet a rag with the T9 and wipe it up, and be done with it. Other than that, other than cleaning everything up, it's simply running the wire, which, you know, I'd love to give you the secrets to doing that, but every boat's going to be different. That one you're going to have to kind of figure out on your own. But feel free to drop a comment and ask a question, and I'll do my best to get back to anyone. And run the wire, plug it into your, you know, whatever machine you have, Frino, Raymarine, Garmin, Simrad, whatever it may be. Which I guess is a good time to say, make sure before you buy your transducer that it's meant for the machine that is in your boat. Because some transducers are simply meant for a specific manufacturer. And if you buy the wrong one, you're definitely going to be regretting it. So let's just get to doing this. All right, so we're back here underneath the boat. Now I get to show you why it's a good idea to cover the transducer. Any excess sealant just comes right off with the tape. And taking the tape off works best if you have fingernails, which I don't have. But simply peel the tape up, and any sealant that might have made its way onto the face of the transducer is gone. It does not exist anymore. We'll do one more wipe up around the edge here, just clean everything up, and then we'll be done with this installation. All right, I've watched a bunch of YouTube, but this is my first time making a YouTube video, so I'm not sure what to do here to end off the video. But everyone always says smash that like button and subscribe, so you should do the same. But in all seriousness, I hope this video helped some people. If it did, I'd really appreciate you letting me know. And if you have bad things to say, well, you can just kick rocks, and have a great day.